right, let's talk about the lion's share. In this book, multiple animals meet for dinner, and there's a cake that is served at the end. Now, as the cake is passed around, each animal takes half of what was given to them. So you'll notice as you go through and read the book, the elephant takes the whole cake and cuts it in half and takes half for himself. And then the hippo thinks that they're going to take half of what was left, hands it to the gorilla. The gorilla takes half of what was left, and the process continues until the ant gets the cake and there's hardly any left. Toward the end of the story, because there's so little cake left, the animals start promising a certain number of cakes that they will bake for the king the next day. And every time a new animal makes a promise, they're doubling the amount of the previous animal. So let's talk about what the activity part looks like. For kinder and first grade, you'll take out the small container of Play-Doh. Now, students can work together in pairs with one chunk of Play-Doh, or you can take the ball of Play-Doh and split it into two, and each student can work with their own piece of Play-Doh. So at first, the students will build their cake. They'll build the cake from the lion's party, just with their Play-Doh. They can use the popsicle sticks to partition along with the story. So when the elephant takes half the cake, they can use their popsicle stick to partition the Play-Doh in half so that they cut their cake in half. So then we can talk about how do we know that this is half? Well, I see 2 equal parts from that one whole cake, so I know this is half. Now, for the older grades, as we continue to partition the way the animals take it, we're going to emphasize what fractional part of the cake that animal took and how it compared to the fractional part that other animals took. So as the hippo takes half of the remaining cake, we're going to ask the older grades, how do you know what fractional part of the cake this one piece is? Well, they may have to also partition the half that the elephant ate in order to figure out how many equal parts would make one whole, to determine that the hippo cut it into fourths. The hippo ate a fourth of the cake. Then the gorilla takes that remaining piece, cuts it in half, and takes a piece for himself. So then we're talking about what fractional part of the cake did the gorilla eat? Same thing, they would need to probably go partition the other pieces in order to determine that there are 8 equal parts in the whole. So the gorilla ate 1/8 of the cake. Now, one important note to make as you're discussing these is to talk about how that denominator, for example, eighths, relates to the size of the pieces. If I partition a cake into 8 equal pieces, those pieces are going to be much smaller than if I only partitioned it into 4 pieces. That tells me that an eighth is much smaller than a fourth. And that's the primary idea that we're trying to get across especially for the 2nd and 3rd grade students. Now, for older students, they may start to notice some of those equivalencies, such as 2/8 was equivalent to 1/4, or 4/8 is equivalent to 1/2. Now, as you continue reading the story, the animals do continue to take half of what's left and then half of what's left. The story does continue, so your students may want to continue partitioning the pieces as long as they can until the pieces become too small. However, it's not necessarily to continue to discuss the fractional parts beyond eighths. Now, toward the end of the story, like I said, when they are promising to double the number of cakes they bake for the king, the students will take, kindergarten and 1st grade students will take 16 colored tiles, and they'll start with the one cake that the ant promises to bake. Well, then the next animal says, I'll bake twice that many. So we'll ask students, can you build a model of how many cakes that animal just promised to bake? Well, I would need to double the one that I have. So now I would have 2 cakes. So that animal promised 2 cakes. Then the next animal says, I'll bake twice that many. So the students then have to figure out how many cakes is that animal promising to make. that animal is promising 4 cakes. So continue on until they use all 16 tiles. Then you can continue to read the story and they don't need to continue modeling it. We simply want students to practice that doubling, and we want them to notice the pattern that every time I promise twice as many cakes, I'm doubling the amount of cakes that I already have. Now, for 2nd and 3rd grade, if you have enough time to get to this part of the activity, you can break away from the tiles and you can have them use their whiteboards, and they can continue to figure out how many cakes are being promised by each animal all the way to the end of the story. Now, the story does say how many cakes it equals, so you'll want to pause as you're reading and give students an opportunity to figure it out before you tell them the answer.